for. First time you will go and open up your DBC Finance icon, something blank will appear. You will just type in a database name, for instance. Obviously I just did a 2025 Q2 training. That's just the issuer. And within each issuer is where you start to create, with each database, which is a .df2 extension, you can create multiple issuers. Within each issuer, that's where you start to create your debt size module, your series, your refundings, and if you're in on the next week's training, your project finance, your multi-purpose deals. Okay, so if I select that and I click new, and again, I'm going to do ABC County, and then you'll see this is an issuer. I know it's a little confusing. It says issuers, but think of the .df2 as a database. Within each database, that's where you create as many issuers as need be. Okay, and again, I'm going to try to follow or go somewhat close to the tutorials, but again, also want to show kind of shortcuts, new features that have occurred since the last time we had created the tutorials. But from this database, you can create as many different issuers, and then within each issuer is when you create the different series. Now, I will say, if you're going to do a refunding, it's always best to put all the actual series, all the refunded bond series, everything underneath a particular issuer, meaning, ABC, if I create a sometimes we'll have clients that'll say, under DEF issuer, I have a bunch of actual series. I want to refund, but my refund is in ABC. Well, it's not a big deal. You can copy from one issuer to another, but sometimes you can imagine if a client didn't know that, and let's say they've got 50. Now you can copy in everything within that you created within DEF into ABC. But then again, if you have the same short name of a series in DEF and you want to copy into ABC and there's the same short name, it can override that. So it really just depends. But it's always good to kind of know beforehand, right? So within ABC or any particular issue where you start to create, again, this is like any kind of Windows-based product. You can always right mouse click. You can always hit the F2 or let's see, F5 pulls up a menu, or use your mouse or your arrows. You can go and then click on the actual button. So within ABC, that's fine. You click that, click new. This is where you can start to create your series, refund case, monitor. That's kind of more touched on the advanced. That's just, if you have a bunch of refunded series or a bunch of actual series and you want to kind of do some kind of a basic, savings analysis where you go, okay, I've got, let's say 50 different actual series. I want to run it through a monitor, anything that will produce at least 5% or 3% savings, show me the results. It's kind of an early detection of, what potential bonds you may want to refund. And then finally, financing, multi-purpose deal. I mean, it's, if you have, let me see, make sure everyone is in. Okay, so if you have project finance, this is, if you have taxable tails, if you've got, somewhat complex structuring or, you know, kind of our main example, what I'll go over next week is, let's say you've got a refund, you want level savings, and then you want new money series to wrap around it to produce overall level debt service. That's done through a project finance, or as it says, financing. Um, Pretty much any complex deal, you're going to have the project finance module. Um, there's really no limitations. Um, you know, Even if you have a bunch of different series and you want to calculate certain expenses or funds in aggregate, but then allocate it to only certain series, or like I mentioned, taxable tail, where you're limited for the tax exempt to 2% of the issuance costs, and then anything over that gets funded into tax. Um, but going back series, and let's just say I'm going to do 2025 new money. Short name is up to 8 characters long. You can do underscore, but it won't allow you to do stuff like, exclamation mark or the multiplication sign. It Once we start diving into this, um, the short name is, in a lot of times, used to reference or to link, or uh, if you want to calculate off of something, a lot of times you're going to use the short name of whatever that happens to be, like a fund or an expense, or even such as bonds or a bond component. So 8 characters long, long name, however you enter that will show up in the reports. By default, proposed, more times than not, you're going to create proposed series. It's not limited to that. So when we get into the refund, you have to select the actual. It doesn't calculate it any differently. It's, again, the status is kind of used also as a way to notify the program what to select. So, for example, when we get into refund later, and we want to pull up or select the refunded series, well, if this was an actual series and we typed that in and we kept it proposed, in the refund case, when we select the bonds to refund, this will not show up. It's no big deal. We go back into the main area and we can edit and then make sure it says actual. So everything by default. So I click OK. Okay. Let me just go in here and make sure, because I was getting a lot of, let me just delete this stuff. Okay. I was cleaning up this heater earlier. And so when you create series and click OK, you go right into it. You'll see it over here. And there's really not, I would say, in terms of saving, I would get into a habit of either clicking on the save button or Control S. And sometimes, now this is a little bit slow, this particular work laptop, but a lot of times, like on my other computer, it's almost instantaneous. Like you don't even see that little box or little hourglass appear, but you can tell at the bottom it'll say series, it's saved to this database, right? And the program, we try to set it up as logical as possible, meaning, you don't have to go in the middle or at the end to put in general bond information. Bonds themselves you create here, any kind of construction project funds, Cap I reserve funds, itemized expenses. Are these bonds callable? Then additional info we'll get into, and then finally, how do we want to solve it, right? And I'm just doing the up and down arrows. So if I go into debt size assumption setup, and about the saving aspect, the only reason I mention that is if you try to hard exit out of the program and you've made any changes, it'll say, you've made changes. Do you want to save? Yes. But this even happened to myself many years ago, where when we did a lot more consulting work, and it was funny because I was training at that time, and I really hammered it. Hey, when you put in a bunch of information and you want to save it, don't save it. Just Control S or hit that save button. It's takes a second. But I was doing consulting, and sure enough, I was putting in all this information, and all of a sudden my work computer just froze up. Well, I kind of laughed about it because I wasn't practicing when I preached. So, but we have since then tools preferences. We have restore backup files, auto save, where you can say auto save timer every certain amount of minutes. Maximum number of autosave files, 5, so forth. So there's ways to retrieve it. We still get clients that email us and say, hey, something happened to my computer, and how do I retrieve it? And then we show them where to go. Speaking of which, in terms of support, I think that's what really, I think that separates us from most companies. And I only say this because, if I have to call cable or my cell or anything to get support, it really hits home, I think, how efficient and how well our support staff is. Myself, I'm in there in that group. And so pretty much everyone in the group has been around as long as myself. Some have been around longer. But pretty much everyone in the group has been with the company since, I would say, 2000, 2001, 2002. So a long time, a lot of years experience. So I would say the first thing you're going to want to do after training is make sure in tools preferences, you're going to want to put your company name. You'll probably notice in the reports it'll say, prepared by. And sometimes we'll get, support on that saying, hey, it says prepared by DBC. How do I change that? Print preferences in the general tab. You'll just put your company name. And then the main thing is you're going to want to put your name, your company email address, and a phone number so we can reach you. You're going to enter it in here. Now, this is for OMS. You can always request, if it's okay with your company, for you to automatically download OMS files. Slugs are free, but we can get to that in a bit. I would say the main thing is tools preferences. You want to put your company name for company name, internet settings, because once you enter all this in, and you have any kind of questions, right? What you're going to do is you'll notice these buttons here. I don't think by default the email, but you can always right mouse click, go to customize toolbars, add, remove. But help email data to DBC. This can say the entire issuer. That means, let's say under ABC County, we've created like 50 different multiple project finances, refundings, so forth. It'll send everything. Most of the times you can just say current document only. Because even if you do send like a refund case and you are refunding certain series, it will also send those series you're trying to refund. But if you click OK, and I just will say, training, ignore, send support, email example, or whatever. So you're going to type in your comment, and it can be fairly complex. It can be very basic. Don't worry. Don't think, oh my gosh, this is so basic. No, just sometimes the easiest. I mean, I laugh with my group because if I take a vacation and I'm out for a week or two and then I come back, it's funny because even though I've done this forever, it's usually the real easy stuff that I forget, and I just go, I can't believe I forgot it. But I don't know. It just is. So you click OK. And you'll see like a debt size data has been successfully sent to DBC. So what happens is in Outlook, that gets sent with your data file. And everyone in our group, somebody will, basically whoever replies back to everyone in the group, I got it first, then we'll be the person that will be supporting you. And a lot of times it's rare that something has come up to where we don't quite understand. We may reply back and say, okay, did you mean this or do you mean that? But in most cases, we know what you're talking about. We will reply back. Here's what you do. A lot of times, screenshots. Here's where you go. And then if you do all that and you still have problems, you can again go to help, email data to DBC, and send it again. Sometimes clients go, well, why don't I just open up an email and send my entire 2025 Q2 training.df2. Here's the problem with that. When you go through help email data to DBC, it doesn't send a .df2. It's like a DFX. It's basically your file with all your, for example, if you've made any changes and this happens, we'll get clients saying, how come, my interest is off by a penny and so these system settings, one of us will go through and go, oh, you made a change. The default is round, the convention is round to the nearest cent in aggregate by lot. Well, sending it through help email data to DBC, any kind of system, any kind of personal changes that are made, that shows up when we open up. It's basically almost like a set in stone subset of a database that's sent to us. Whereas if you just attach the whole DF2 file to an email and send it to our finance, the problem about that is that all of our personal system preferences will update or change to when we open up your database. We may be running, or you may be running, a different version of the program, and that could be the problem. So it's always best to go through help email data to DBC. A few other things. So going now back into the program, debt size assumption setup. You'll see here, dated delivery, first interest payment date. So for example, if I wanted to type in 7/1/25, all right, and then 1/1/26, you'll notice now you'll see blue. I've kind of changed up a little bit. It's a little bit, but that's usually on your end, probably by default will be a darker black. But the point is you'll see the blue. Why is something blue versus non-blue? Blue allows you, or it's a kind of a heads up. Hey, this is information you or somebody who used the program hard coded, right? And that's kind of important if you think about, and a lot of times going through this training, I try to set up examples of kind of common, support situations. So we'll get a lot of times a file sent to us and says, hey, how come I'm not getting level debt service in the first year or two? Well, almost immediately I'll go into the bond component, maturity structure tab. I'll see in blue, a 0 or some kind of a number. Once you hard code something in, you're telling the program, regardless if it's optimal or not, this is what I want, and so then, I'll just reply back, oh, this was hard coded 0. You're not producing any principal in that year. And that's why it's not level debt service in that first year. Oh, either, oh, I forgot to do that, or, oh, that's intentional, or, oh, okay. So um, you kind of want to know once you calculate, you kind of want to know what you've hard coded in versus what the program is producing, right? So anywhere in the program, if you press the F1 key, and this is anywhere in the program. So, and getting back to the support, it's Monday through Friday, 9 to 6 Eastern. Okay, so if you send us your file outside of the hours, 9 to 6 Eastern, Monday through Friday, there's no guarantee. We try. It always seems like one of us is always kind of looking at support, even outside of the hours. There's no guarantee, but we try. We try to even outside of support hours try to reply. Um, but just know that if you do it and you get used to, sometimes that happens. Clients will get used to it, and then all of a sudden they'll send it after hours, and then nobody gets back to them until the next day, and they're like, "What's going on?" It's like, well, you kind of got used to, you know, you almost forgot that there are support hours. I know we did it before, but there's no guarantee, right? So, what's great about what I also really like about the program is the help. Sometimes I get frustrated, say, with Excel, and the paperclip gets pulled up, and then you have to start typing in, and then a big library appears, and then you got to sift through it. Anywhere in the program, you aren't quite sure what it means. You hit the F1 key, and we try to provide as much information as possible. Now, it used to be, this is before I joined, a lot of the programmers. Now, when I did join, it was mostly phone. Like the phone would ring, it's a client, and basically have to kind of guess over the phone what the problem is. Then we tell them, okay, send us your file. Then I would have to open it up. It took forever. But before I came along and some others in our group, um, a lot of the programmers, they took calls. And I'm kind of stereotyping here, but a lot of times programmers want to spend less time on the phone and they want to spend more time programming. So what they tried to do is make it as detailed as possible so they could just, if they got a call and someone said, "Hey, interest day basis, is it on a 366 or a 365?" Right? And so, our programmers could say, go to debt size assumption setup, press F1, click on the link, and you'll see, you know, actual will use a 366, right? Um, and then we get more information on that. So anywhere in the program, again, when you press F1, you're not going to have to type in some kind of okay, I've got to, now from here, I've got to figure out, no, it's wherever you are, hit F1. We have an FAQ section. These are actually frequently asked questions. I think the last one we did, it's been a while. I think we've almost covered everything. Some are very basic in nature. Some can be a little more complex. It really depends on what it is. I would say, and a lot of times when when you send us a file and it is an FAQ, what we'll do is we help you out. We say, here's what you do, here's why. It is, and here's how to correct it. And then I'll try to let you know, hey, this is kind of for your reference as well. Just in case you forget, you can go back. So, for example, we get this a lot. What is a general fund, and can I remove it from net debt service report? Basically, general funds created automatically. If you have interest that's not being applied anywhere, the most common example is you have a CAPI, you have a reserve fund, And the Cap I typically takes care of 100% interest through a particular date, but your reserve fund, you don't you don't because by default it tries to apply towards debt service. Well, Cap I takes care of it. So if you don't direct it to another fund like a Cap I or project fund, then the program goes, okay, we're going to create a general fund and just put that excess interest into the general fund until, in this scenario, the Cap I is done, and then it will be released. And so that's that. This is a fairly common, um, a fairly common support that we get. Is what is this? How do I get rid of it? Oh, I mean, a lot of time, or you're in a project finance, you're calculating, you know, Cap I interest in aggregate and allocating it pro rata. Well, obviously, the interest that's allocated is not going to match up to each individual series. So we'll say, instead of calculating it in aggregate, you may want to calculate it on a per series basis so it won't produce anything extra, right? So, and there's a number of other ones. So I would say the FAQ, glossary. We'll get this a lot of times, a debt service reserve fund, 125, the lesser of, say, well, when I calculated in Excel, my 125% of average annual adjusted debt service was this. Why is DBC giving me that? A lot of times you have a question about why DBC is calculating something. F1, go to glossary, and we try. You can click on it and it will show you, here's the formula. Okay. And then we have I would say the only other thing, NLF, which we call natural language format. That's just how to enter in, we have examples, different types of expenses and so forth. But in the expense, when we get to that, we'll get to it. Okay. So the main thing is anywhere in the program, hit F1 if you're not quite sure, especially when it's not during support hours. And you'll notice the default settings are either what's most commonly used settings or off of any kind of industry regulations. So it wouldn't make sense if the default is, say, quarterly on a actual 365. Typically it's semi-annual 3360. You need to make changes, you can make changes. Cost of issuance, underwriter's discount. I would say if this is a very basic deal you're working on, sure, use these two if you want. There's kind of an updated, better way. You'll notice, first off, you're very limited. If I put 250,000, and then if you go, well, I want to itemize. Well, you can itemize down here, but a lot of times you'll end up going, wait a minute, I don't, I need to calculate something that doesn't fit under one of these three parameters. It's very limited scope. And also, if you do type something, right, you're in the main area, you don't see any icons. You don't really know if you did, you may be working on this and then days later you come back, you have to go in here, then you go, oh, yeah, I did it. I did enter that. Because you can enter it in the expense section. And this happens a lot. You'll calculate, you'll go, why is my cost of issuance 250,000 higher than when I entered in an icon that you can see in the general area? Well, you got to go in here. So I'll show you kind of a better way, I think, in a more flexible way of creating your issuance costs. But if it's a basic vanilla, it fits under one of these. And again, if you go, well, what does that mean? Hit F1, dollar per $1,000 par amount of the bonds, percentage of par, and some kind of fixed amount. I would say almost everywhere in the program, when you hard code in a number, it's going to be in thousands. That's more of a programming, I think, to keep the program as fast and robust as possible. Now, when you create itemized expenses, or you have specific draws or a balance requirement in a fund, like a reserve fund or a cap I, that's about the only area where you would type in to the penny. Obviously, itemized expenses, it makes more sense to be to the penny. But everywhere else, if you're going to hard code in, let's say principal maturity amounts, it's going to be in thousands. And yeah, so, but we'll get back to this. Finally, notes, I could put 2020, I could say, oh, 6/18/2025, quarter two, debt size and refund training. Now, obviously, because I gave it a pretty descriptive, it's pretty obvious. I don't need to go in here. I know, just looking from, even from Explore, oh, here's my Q2 training 2025. But obviously, you're going to name it something different. But let's say I gave it a generic, and then I go later on, I'm like, what is this? Why did I create it? If it was just a generic database name I gave it, in generic, 2025 new money. Well, I could go in here, I could double click and go, okay. So any kind of notes that pertain to this particular series, that's where you can enter that information in. Okay. So again, save. I have kind of a slow, this particular one, Control S. And I believe a lot of the keystrokes are available towards the end of debt size and the refund training. These two, we do have some video tutorials, but again, I'm recording this, and so sometime this week, maybe clean it up a bit. We'll put it on YouTube, put it on the thing that I started, kind of a DBC finance videos, and so you guys can go through it. But I'll reiterate all that towards the end. So going down the line, bond components, right? And again, up and down arrow you can use, or you can just mouse click on it. So general bond information first. And I'll show you why this is important. So let's say we'll go serial, I don't know, 30, let's say 55. Serial bonds through 2055. You notice here, dated delivery, first interest payment date. If you create a series and you just skip this debt size assumption setup and start creating the bond components, this will be blank. And I've seen this a lot. Somebody will skip the general stuff, go right into creating the bonds. They'll hard code in these dates, and all of a sudden they will get back, because they can't calculate. They will go back to debt size assumptions and hard code in dates that differ from the hard coded amounts. Well, if you hard code in anything here, it will run off of these dates. If this differs from your general debt size assumptions, so that's why then we'll get someone send a file and say, look, this doesn't make sense. It's, I'm getting a different interest calculation. Why, because they'll say, hey, it's from here, but let's say they did something like, something like that early on, and they'll go, I don't understand why I'm getting interest. I'm not getting it from 7/1/25. I'm getting it. Well, one of the first things is I'll go and make sure anything in blue font set in stone. Now, what can you do? You can right mouse click and go unprotect, right? Or if you scroll over it, hit the delete key, it will snap back to whatever date you enter in debt side. So there's a reason why the program is set up in a certain order, just so you know going forward that it's not just a random here. No, it kind of this we try to make it because we know you're going to have to enter in a lot of information. We try again to make it as easy as possible for you. Again, more times than not, you're going to create serial bonds, right? Semi-annual, 3360. Again, you can hit F1, you still get that help. But, these may be, let's say, cabs, convertible cab, and you have to put in that final compounding date until it then goes to, semi-annual simple interest or a note, you know, typically less than a year, typically less than 18 months when it matures. But by default, it wouldn't make sense to have default settings set to say a cab term, right? Because that's now just because you name it serial or if you name it a term bond, that doesn't mean that's how it's going to be calculated. It's going to be determined down here. By default, yes, serial, price to the actual maturity. If it's a term bond, which we'll get to in a minute, price to the final maturity. So hit the maturity structure, you'll get an enter dates. If you click cancel and you go back and then you go, wait, where did it go? Again, you can do either hit the F5 key, right mouse click, go back to enter dates. This is kind of an easier way to enter, so if he said, okay, we'll make it 7/1/26 to 7/1/55 annual. If they're semi-annual maturity dates, you'd obviously make that change. Day alignment. Again, you could say every year on the first business day, I want it, and then it will automatically adjust. So for example, first business day annually. So you notice 7/3, 7/2, 7/3. Now, if I mess up, you can copy, paste from Excel dates. If I go copy down and just say plus 12, that adds 12 months. You can say plus 7 days, it'll add 7 days. So there's a number of things you can do. Same thing with the rates, yields, price. If you already have the rates in. One other thing, if you have most clients do not, but if you have a Thompson Municipal Market Monitor account, this is where you can automatically download MMD yields. You would enter that information here, and then I'll show you in a little bit. You'd go to additional info, modified bonds, and there's an area where you can import that. If you don't have that and it's from another source, you can copy paste, that information here. Let's just say it's 1. I'm going to put some kind of a plus 0.0, say something like that. Now, you'll notice, obviously, we haven't hard coded anything here. And so let's say you did copy, hard coded a yield less than the rate. Obviously, you get some kind of a premium, right? Or 1.045, some kind of a discount. The main thing here is don't hard code in all 3 columns. Now, when you calculate, it'll allow you, it will give you a warning message. It'll say, hey, you hard coded rate, yield, price. It's up to you to verify the reports to make sure the calculations are accurate, because sometimes they're not. So more times than not, you need to go one out of these 3 Again, you can right mouse click, go unprotect, or you can go to the cell, hit the delete key, and then that will unprotect it. By default, issuance denom in 5,000. Obviously, if it's not in 5,000 denominations, you make that change. So you can see here, even though it says 5, that represents 5,000. So you would hard code something in thousands. Take down, that's dollar, it's per maturity. Anytime you have to kind of scroll away from the main screen, it's intentional. These are settings that are just, while you may need to use them, they're not that common. Okay. VAR, VAR, it's a variant. And again, hit F1 key in this area, you scroll down. We'll get this a lot of times. We'll get, let's say, something like that. Bifurcated maturity. How come it's, when I run the numbers, it's putting it all in the cheaper bond? Well, you'll have to use the variant, which is, just a different, if not, it kind of will treat it as if maybe this was kind of a mistake. But again, that's something that's a little more, I usually touch on next week. The important thing is 2 out of the 3, that's fine. Let the program calculate accurately the unprotected column. All right. Because if you do hard code all 3 of them, I see it quite a bit, the numbers may not, you might be off of a thousandth spot when you hard code it in, and then you're getting slightly different amount, for example. But anything scroll over, I wouldn't, basically there's a rhyme reason to having our settings not on the main area that you're viewing. Same thing with advanced. I would say about the only time when I click on advanced, there was a period where while back, a lot of clients were using variable. Where do I put in my variable rate table? Where do I put it in? That was one of the few times that maybe thought, well, maybe if we had an extra tab instead of going to the advanced. But again, sometimes you do that, and certain clients will go, well, there's a tab here. Does that mean I have to always put no? So we kind of kept it in the advanced area. But again, this is information where you may have interest payment dates that aren't on a semi-annual. You may have some odd interest payment dates. You'd enter that here. Assume call dates. This is where you can force certain bonds to be priced to that call date for pricing and or arb yield. Again, hitting F1, we kind of explain that. We also explain, hey, be careful. Make sure you know what you're doing here because, the bonds are going to be priced to the lower of the yield to maturity, yield to call. But sometimes we've noticed if you're trying to copy or match someone's numbers, even if that's, it's not the lesser of, you'll want to know, well, where can I force the program? But again, these are areas I rarely have ever seen this used. Sometimes you may, if you have amortized almost like a loan, but just know the advanced areas, the areas you got to scroll more times than not. Oops, what is that doing that there? Did I put in something? It's weird. 1 point. 7127, right? 26. Huh. Why is that doing that? 1.0125. Huh. Why is that doing it? That's interesting. but they're slightly off. What did I do? I did something, I think. Let's see. So, huh. No, make sure. Interesting. I'll have to look and see why those are slightly off. Huh. Sure. 7125. Oh, nope. 7125, 1126. Yep. Huh. It's interesting. Why is that? There's a rounding. Did I make a change? I know I made a change somewhere. Let's see. No, that's fine. In aggregate. Hmm. I'll get to that in a little bit. I don't know what's going on there. Okay. So, going forward, serial bonds, typically, unless you want to calculate interest off of a certain date, or you want to uh, calculate like an expense off of certain maturities. You can't reference certain maturities. You can only reference a bond component. You would split that out. More times than not, you can put your serials because each one of these is price to the maturity. So this is a total of 30 serial bonds. Term bonds, though, each term bond has to be in its own bond component. So, for example, term, right, 60, let's say, term bond. So if you had two term bonds, one that matures in 60, one that in 65, you can't just create one term bond and enter those maturities in. And I'll show you. Term bond due 2060. So you'd make this change. This is the only change. Price to final maturity. So you would enter your first sinking fund payment date, and then the final date is the date that this term bond matures, right? And let's just say it's at 2.75. Because of that, the rates, yields, prices all need to be the same, right? Because this is one term bond that matures in 60 with sinking fund payment dates starting in 56. If you forget, because you named a term and you thought, oh, it knows, and you just kept it as a default, then this assumes 5 serial bonds. They're priced to their its own maturity, just to let you know. So you have one term bond, you create another term 65 bond due 2065. Click create. Again, click term, go to maturity. Right, that's 61. No, I'm just going to put 3. And then you would continue to do so. You can create as many different bond components as need be. Okay? So going down project funds, you can create as many project funds. You may have one that has a certain amount that needs to be deposited. You may have draws from it. You may have another one that absorbs the remaining bond, the excess proceeds. I'll show you the different ways. So this is just generic project fund. You may have different showing you the different ways. So if you know, no, I have a 250. I have a $250 million project fund. You may not know what the draws are. That's pretty much all you need to do. Or you might go, no, I know what the draws are. They're going to start in 8/1/25, and let's say it ends on let's see, 817171, so like 6/1/26, and I've got monthly draws, for example. You would enter those draw requirements here. Or you may go, I don't know what the draws are. I do know it's a $250 million deposit. I want the program to dictate or to calculate what the draws are. You can change the draw weights. You can say I want it half, 0.5, 0.5 compared to the rest. So as you can imagine, we kind of tackle, so let's say it's 10 million, making it easy. 10 million, you type in that in thousands, 10,000, 10 million. Or you may say, I don't know what it is. Or it's going to be excess proceeds. I'm going to put in some kind of a target par amount, and I just want to fund excess proceeds. You can select that. Default is calculated, and it will determine, given all these settings, what the deposit of the project fund will be. And again, you can create multiple project funds. It's not limited to just one. So you can see and create another one. Reserve Cap I. You'll notice this component gallery. And this is not only an area where you can double click, and we provide example setups that you can activate and go through. You can say typical capitalized interest fund. When's the end date? And I could say, oh, it'll go through 6/1/26, let's say. Create. Go down here and you'll see adjusted bond interest accrued through 6/1/26. Now, hitting F1 in that area, we give you examples. So again, if you don't quite remember or know what to do, you can hit F1 in there, and we tell you accrued. See, if the Cap I end date is not a regular bond interest payment date, then the formula should show the interest accrued through the end date like this. So accrued is kind of an important a word. I would always, now adjusted is, it adjusts any kind of, any kind of accrued interest, if the dated delivery are different, that amount of interest will get adjusted. But I would say, so it doesn't matter if it's adjusted or not, if the date and delivery date are the same. Accrued, you never have to worry. Accrued will go through that particular date you enter. If you don't put accrued bond interest through 6/1/26, it will accrue interest to the nearest interest payment date. So accrued will take care of any kind of through date that doesn't fall on an interest payment date. So that's kind of a little trick there. Just always put accrued. You don't have to worry. So I would say probably not use component gallery if you're just starting out. The only reason is because, at least for a lot of people, anywhere in here, if you click, we have examples. It's not limited to this. It can be, draw dates can be a date followed by some kind of an amount that you want to draw. You would type that out. We cannot provide every possible example. It would fill up page after page. The only reason I say that I would encourage, if you're starting off typing, is because you start to learn, we call it, we call it NLF, natural language format. We kind of joke because it's not that natural maybe at the beginning, but you may come to a point to where you can click in here and then you don't see an example that you can just select, and we'll get into the reserve fund. But if you type it, I just think, at least for me, when I was kind of forced to really, when I didn't want to kind of take shortcuts, it forced me to kind of learn this language that the program uses. But anyway, so that's the Cap I. Again, hit delete. If I do, instead of clicking on here, doing a typical reserve, I'll show you debt service reserve fund. And also show you, which they don't show you in the tutorial, how to save any kind of icon. You can save it in the component gallery and you can retrieve it. Generally, again, when I kind of went over that FAQ, why do we have a general fund in the net debt service report? Usually it's because nothing is selected here. It assumes, now NA, it will try to apply to debt service. Obviously, Cap I takes care of 100% of interest through, what is it, 6/1/26. So if there's interest that occurs, which it would in a reserve fund, right, during that period, it doesn't really have anywhere, it can't go towards debt service because Cap I takes care of it. So you can do another fund. And again, this is in the tutorials. You can select, this is where the short name starts to come up, where you can link it. Let's say I want to apply it instead of the project. I want to apply it to the Cap I. And then when the Cap I after 6/1/26, then I want it to draw down debt service. And again, you can have it at a different rate. You can have it something other than the first interest payment date of the bonds. I would say, though, if you hard code in any dates, right, this happens sometimes. Somebody will say, oh, I'm going to do the 7/1/65 or whatever. Well, later on, they add bonds. The final maturity of the bond components is no longer 65. And then they run the numbers, send us their file and says, how come my reserve fund is releasing on 7/1/65 when my final maturity is, let's say, 7/1/2070 or 7/1/2060. Well, again, you hard code in a maturity date. You're telling the program, I don't care. This is, regardless of everything else, this is the maturity date of the reserve fund. If you hit delete, it will assume the maturity date is the final maturity date of your bonds that you set up. So it will fluctuate if you update, change, whatever that final date is of your bonds. So just remember, you hard code a date, hard code amount. It doesn't matter if it makes sense or not. When you start calculating, it assumes you know what you're doing, and it's not going to go, oh, well, you changed. It used to be 65 was your final maturity date. We think you didn't mean that. No, you don't, because you don't want a program like that. Because what if you're like, no, I want it to be released on this date. You want to have confidence in the program. So if you keep it blank, it will adjust to whatever the maturity date happens to be in your file, in your series. And again, you can click on here if you want. Let's do the double click. But again, it's not limited to this. I would get, and again, you can do F1 and we show you the kind of the basic 10% of par, let's say, 125% of average annual adjusted debt service. But if you did want to, you could do maximum annual debt service. Now, if you what happens is, if you type something in wrong, you'll hear the noise. But at the bottom, it'll say general data error. So this is just going to say whatever the lesser is, whatever's a smaller amount that's calculated on line 2, 3, or 4, that's what gets deposited, the reserve fund. And what it's going to do is going to apply any interest to the Cap I during the Cap I period. And then after the Cap I is no longer, it's going to draw down debt service. You don't need to put a start and end date. It will know. Again, you can hard code in, the 6/1/26, right? But again, what if you go back and go, oh, my cap I, no, I need to capitalize to a different date, and you don't change here, it won't adjust accordingly. Okay. Expenses. This is where we're going to get into. Remember, I mentioned the cost of issuance, underwriter's discount. If you're doing very vanilla, just very basic deals, you may want to use this. The problem is it's limited to one of these three options. And I think more importantly, this is a notes, which is fine, but you don't see, again, if you type in anything in the main area, you have no idea what you typed in, you have to go back and then you go. And the other thing is this, if you do have project finance, that module, and this happens a lot, you'll create, let's just say you're creating a refunding and you're creating a new money. And ultimately you want a multi-purpose deal where the refund is level savings, and then this new money is going to wrap around it to get overall level debt service. Let's say you've created a bunch of itemized in this area, that does not transfer. That will calculate. So if you did it here, put in a bunch of information here and here in the new money, and you did the same in the refunding, what happens? It's generally like, hey, I've created both, but really what I want to do is have the issuance cost calculated in aggregate and then allocated a certain way. Well, unfortunately, because it's not an icon, you just can't right mouse click, cut, and then paste it into a different module, right? So unfortunately, what you'd have to do is basically delete all this, and then you would have to create, let's say, an issuance expense. And I'll show you that. Detail, let's say. Default, these is for more itemized, but here's the issuance expense. Click create. You'll kind of see, this used to only be available in the project finance module. So let's see, Control V. So you could do cost of issuance, and it could be 150,000. It could be 1% of par, 1% of, say, if you don't, of total bond value. And again, you click on here, you don't even see the bond value here. So again, just because it doesn't show, it's impossible. If we had every conceivable formula listed here, it would be page after page. So let's just say it's some kind of amount, or we could say 50,000. You can itemize, you can right mouse click, go to append if you want to, add 5 more rows and so forth. And you could say, let's say per bond, it's kind of like the dollar per $1,000 par amount of the bonds. You can type that in. You could say 1.5 per bond. How about 0.5 per bond, 1% or 0.05% of total, bond value, or it could be a certain amount, and what's great about this is, let's say, I don't know, it seems like the itemized expenses, and then you might have something where you go, oh, I want something included or not included. Here's an example expense, itemized. This is where you can include it as underwriters. And again, if you go, well, what does that mean if I select it? F1 key, we tell you, if you select underwriters, what it's include and what it's not including. Usually this is used more for, you start getting into It's obviously not included in underwriters or cost of issuance. Um, if it's included in a certain way in 80/38, it can get fairly complex. That's why we're here. You may have cost of issuance that you go, excess proceeds. I want to absorb any kind of rounding in. Well, you can't really do that in the issuance expense. So you would create, and if you go, you know what, I want to edit, I'll just say, so anytime you see an icon here that you've created, and I think this seems to a lot of clients like this. They go, I create a bunch of itemized expenses. Do I have to just do that over and over with each new series in different databases? No. You can right mouse click, go copy, go to tools, component gallery. First time you ever do it, it'll show in a finance.cgl. You can determine where you want to save it. Click open. And then right mouse click, go paste. Right. Now, whenever I go to expense detail, I'll see it. So if I get rid of this, double click, issue, long name. Now, obviously, you would probably have to come in and change the formulas, right? Because it's not going to be set. But this is a way, it's basically like a blueprint where you don't have to, and I've noticed this, that if you have a lot of itemized expenses, maybe not an issuance expense, but itemized, I have a bunch of different cost of issuance and underwriter's discount that I created, itemized them, and didn't, for whatever reason, didn't want to use an issuance expense. Do I have to recreate that with each new series or existing? It's like, no, you create it as long as in tools preferences, the component gallery, if you delete it, then you'll have to just go search for it. But anything going forward or anything existing, you click on it, you'll see it. You can double click on it and you can retrieve it. And all you have to do is just change the formula. Right? Going down here, call provisions. These are bonds. We'll get to that when we do the refunding. But you would set it up not only here, but then you would link it in here. But again, we'll do that fairly soon when we start getting into the refundings. Additional info menu, reporting options. If you want to add additional titles, footnotes where you can say all reports, specific reports, add in some kind of, if I could just say, well, it's all reports, and I'll say it's, quarter two. But whatever you liked. Alternate text, when we calculate and you see in any particular report something that's worded by DBC and you want to change that, that's where you would go in, select whatever, all reports, certain reports. The big thing is the original text needs to be exactly how it's it has to show exactly how it is. So if it's a title of a report, and let's say it's in all caps, make sure the original title or text you put in all caps, and then you replace it with whatever you want. And other sources and other uses, typically recommend for other uses, create an expense. Other sources, it's a negative expense. So if it's some kind of an equity contribution, for example, I would probably not go this route because it's not very flexible. I would create an expense, and then the formula, let's say it's $1,000, it'd be minus 1,000, and it will show up as another source. We'll get into other debt service. Finally, at the end, how do we want to solve this? Now, we're solving right now on a bond year. Obviously, fiscal date you can enter in here, or you could enter in here. Right? I'm just keeping it as the bond year. But by default, level debt service. And that's the default bond solution. Now, I will say when we create refunds, it will be level debt service. The problem about that is it's not structuring savings. It's just level refunding debt service. If it's anything but level or equal, where we want level principal, anything else that you select, you have to enter in some kind of revenue constraints. And we'll get into that in a moment. Okay. So remember we talked before about project fund. You have a certain amount, and then you go, maybe I'll just have it to excess proceeds. And because I know it's a $250 million target par amount, where do I enter it? You would enter in here. But by default, generally, you're going to want the program to solve. Solution adjustments. This is if you have some kind of ongoing expense, ongoing draws, earnings. By default, we are solving for level gross debt service, meaning whatever the bond debt service report, that's going to be level. Obviously, we've created Cap I and reserve fund. If you're like, well, why is my net debt service not level? Because it doesn't solve by default level net debt service. How do we do that? We don't have any ongoing expenses. We would just then switch. I mean, you could if you want to just cover your bases, but it doesn't matter since we don't have an ongoing expense. Adjust debt service. Apply that way. If feasible, it's going to match the net debt service report and hopefully be level. Additional debt service for wrapping. There's different ways, and I'll show you in a moment how to do that. Same thing with revenue constraints. Bond component targets, I believe in one of our examples in our tutorial, you may have, I need X, I need 50 million for the serial bonds exactly to be targeted to that. That's where you'd enter a solution group and some kind of target amount. Overlap, we'll get into project finance, not relevant. So you go through all that. You click calculate. Now this will say cost of issue defined in the expense section. The reason the warning is up there, because again, a lot of times we had clients that maybe input also in debt size assumption setup. So that will double count. It won't override something. So warnings are just warnings. They can be somewhat serious in nature or not, or just a heads up, just in case you forgot. Error messages, obviously you can't run the program, and it's going to tell you why and how to fix it. Click OK. So you have a general area. Obviously, if you didn't type in let's say you had itemized expenses and you thought, they're supposed to be in thousands. So you typed them in thousands. Obviously, you'd get a much different amount. You'd go, oh my gosh, that's way off. You go directly into the expense section and saying, oh, I typed 250 instead of 250,000, thinking 250 is in thousands. So you click OK. Print. So when we start selecting bond statistics, bond. You can select it once and hit the arrow key if you want. Cost of issuance, we have that. I'll just do a cost of issuance. Formula verification. Anything that you see parentheses, that means you can select and you can modify it. So let's say we want to see annual on a summary, and then I want to see it annual on a detail. Detail meaning each bond component is going to give you a debt service report. I will say though, for verifying, you probably want to keep it on continuous only because, let's say you're trying to verify interest. Well, you probably want to see those semi-annual interest payment dates. Or you have a general fund, it's always best to kind of view to verify in its most detailed or default form. But I'm going to do that. Let's see, reserve. I'll do the cap by project. That's fine. Cost of it. Now, if these are reports and you can kind of be selected, you want it to go up more, if you want it to at the end, you can save. If you're always, especially after you modify and you've got a lot more reports shown, you can save it. So I can say save as. And again, first time, you'll have something like this. You can put it wherever you want to put it. Click open. And I could just say, 2026 or 25 Q2 debt size. I can say, Q2, debt size, port. And you'll see it up there. So that way, even if it's in a different debt size that we create, you can go in and load it, double click, and you'll see it appear. I will say most times you're just going to want to click view. But before that, actually, whenever you look at certain reports and you go, why doesn't it show that? Oh, let me just show you, for example, view. Let's see. A lot of this you've seen, par amount, project fund, the other fund deposits. And again, you may not like that it says other fund deposits. You might want it to say something else. Remember, additional info, reporting options, alternate text. You can type out other fund deposits, and I want it to say something else. Cost of issuance. Now you might go, okay, that's good. That's good. Can I break out the cost of issuance? I want to see if, now you could view the cost of issuance report as well. But just to show you, if there's something, whether it's that bond pricing, you may go, because I think by default, it won't show you the sinking fund payment dates in their amounts. So let's say for this, you go, this is great, but either, I just want to show one line item, the 7160 and the 7165 of the bond pricing. How do I do that? Well, any report that you have, print preferences. If I wanted to print details, if I wanted to break that out, I could on that report. Bond pricing, aggregate term bond. And again, you go, what does that mean? In these reports, the sinking fund amounts of a bond component designated as term bonds are aggregated and reported as a single maturity on a final sinking fund date. So you make that, click OK, go back to view. Now you'll see it. Or vice versa. You go, that's great, but I want to see the sinking funds. Well, you'd uncheck. So basically, if you ever have a question about something that shows or you don't want it to show, a lot of times you can go to print preferences, go to the relative tab, and you can activate or deactivate something. Bond summary statistics, we used to, a lot of clients were like, I want to see average life or average coupon per maturity. Well, the old way is you had to basically create a serial maturity bond per bond component, because then it would print it out and show here. We have our newest report is the bond maturity statistics report. So you don't have to do that. Obviously, if something's included or not, you can go And that sometimes when you create an itemized cost of issuance or underwriters, you can activate or deactivate in certain yields. But yeah, you've seen this before, bond summary statistics. So this is kind of one of our newest report. It's not that new, it's been out a while. But as you can see, here's the average life per maturity. Because before, you could only report average coupon, average life per bond component. And so that became a problem when, you wanted to break it out per serial bond. Now you don't have to do that. Now you can just pull up your bond maturity statistics report and it will break it out. And there's a lot of other info you can select or deselect that will show on this report. Same thing with PV of 1 BP change. And I'll show you that in a minute. Bond debt service, right? So obviously you look at it and you go, that's not level. Remember, we solved level net debt service. Let me just do that. I want to show you the most. And a lot of times we can tell people who've gone through training and people who haven't because, if you set everything up right, you're not going to probably view this bond solution report. If you know what you're doing, but a lot of times we don't, or we miss. So the problem is debt service, bond debt service, net debt service. It's not really showing you what's included in the structuring. It's just reporting what the bond debt service and what the net debt service is, right? So this is obviously, we made the change, so it's not level. Detailed, this is just the serial bonds component debt service schedule. That first term bond due 2060, and then the one in 65. But net debt service, if it's level, no problem. But again, what happens is you forget to change debt, solution assumption setup, solution adjustments that apply earnings and draws to adjust debt service. You forgot to do that. So it won't be level, right? And so if you do everything right, you probably don't need to view the bond solution report. If you don't make all the right selections and calculate, or it's not mathematically possible, unfortunately, net debt service or bond, it's just reporting. It's not showing you what's included, what's not. That's the bond solution report. And, if you're in a finance thing at some point and you're running universal bond solutions, it's the universal bond solution. Basically, the bond solution report, I think, is one of the most important because it's going to show you what's included, what's not in regards to the solution. And we'll get to this in a minute. Like we're going to set up a fill solution where you have a certain amount of debt service you need to achieve in a particular year. Well, net debt service or bond debt service, that's just going to report what the output is, right? This is showing you all these adjustments. Here's remember the bond debt service report? That's this. Here's all the adjustments from the draws of the cap I, earnings of the reserve fund, and then the release to produce level. So this is doable, right? So I think the bond solution report is very important. A lot of clients maybe that don't go through training, they skip it. And that's why we probably, and it's totally fine. That's why we get paid on our support. But a lot of, hey, how come this isn't level? For example, and more times than not viewing the bond. Sometimes if you're starting off and you do view the bond solution, you still it may be a little confusing, but at least in the bond solution, it's going to tell you. So if you forgot to do the adjust debt service for the draws and the earnings, this won't even be there. It'll just be proposed debt service total. And you'll go, oh, where's the draws? Where's the of the cap I? Where's the interest earnings and the release of the reserve fund? Right? That's not even reported. Well, then you'll either send it to us or go, wait a minute, solution assumption setup, solution adjustment. That's where I need to make that. So reserve fund, remember we did the lesser up test where it gets deposited. See, we have these two interests. If we didn't do anything, these two amounts would show up in the net debt service under the general fund. It would create it. If we didn't dictate or direct it somewhere. Because during the cap I period, we do have interest earnings of the reserve. We need to direct it somewhere, or it gets put in a general fund, and then once cap I is retired, it will then dump it all into debt service after. So this is showing you right. And again, very, very long, right? And then cap I, here's deposited, here's the schedule, here's the reserve fund interest earnings. So given that rate, the interest, principal, interest earnings in the reserve fund to meet the scheduled draws, which is 100% of accrued interest through that 6/1. That's why it's a smaller amount. It's not a full 6-month period. Project fund, remember we had the 10 million. Obviously the principal a little bit less because you have interest. Cost of issuance, this tells us, oh, there was the rounding, 342.95. Formula, this is also, I don't think it's stressed really in the, I mean, every example, I would say this about the tutorials, debt size and refunding. When you go to it, don't let the amount of pages that pulls up make you just not even look at it. You know, I don't know if it's still a couple hundred or 300 pages, only because a lot of bond math at the beginning. You have to understand with each analysis, each example that we go through, every report is printed out in the PDF file. So if you don't know that, and all of a sudden you open it up and it's 200-300 pages, sometimes it's like, oh, I don't have time. No, for the actual, like what you have to type in, it's not a lot, you know. And I'm not saying skip all that other stuff, but just know that we have to kind of show every report, even like statement of assumptions that nobody really ever looks at. That's just all the settings that were selected. But this is, I think it's important. The formula, remember the lesser of, we'll get this a lot. Hey, I calculated, you know, my lesser of test was maximum annual debt service because they didn't calculate, they calculated their 125% of average annual adjusted debt service differently. So they'll go, I don't understand why this is a lesser amount. We'll show them. Hit F1, go to glossary. A lot of times I'll just do it in my Excel, make sure it matches, and we'll reply back. Here's how it's done. Here's in the glossary. Here's how we calculate it. And it does match. But this shows you 10%, the 125%, and then the maximum annual debt service. The lesser of these three was the 125% of average, and that's what gets deposited. You know, so it's too close to the stop sharing button. Now, when we look through this net debt service, what I like about this, and you may never, there's also, you know, save reports as Excel. You can save each one of these reports as, you know, in a separate tab in Excel by selecting Save as Excel XML file. Just know when it gets saved into Excel and you go into Excel and you go over the cells, it's not like it's showing you how it's calculated. It's just put into that Excel. But a lot of times, you know, if you, instead of view, which is, you're probably going to most of the time, that's how it's going to show when you report it. But access, there's some neat things to do on access, only because, you can highlight, you can total, and you can copy it to the clipboard. And you can kind of go through different, and this is just up to you, but this is just in a different form access. Let me save that. But let's say in this example, you go, look, um, my net debt service is 4 million, and I need it to be, let's say 4.1 million, or whatever it happens to be, right? You need to fill and produce a certain amount of debt service each year, and it can be something on it increases by a certain percentage. A lot of times you may have the cash flow and you need to know, how do you do that? Okay, so I'll go save, open. I don't want to just, I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to call it fill to, let's just say it's 4.2 million annual. And there's different ways to view this. You can do max tree. We have like a detail list. I think a lot of clients seems like they like to view it like that. This is kind of the default that I kind of grew up with, so to speak. But it's just different ways to view. So in the fill, this is the 4.2 or whatever it happens to be. How do I get a certain amount of net debt? I want to solve it net debt service, right? Because you remember the net debt service is by these adjust debt service, because by default it's NA and it's just gross debt service, and that's fine. When I calculate, how can I get a certain amount of debt service, if feasible, in certain years? How do I do that? Well, it's what we call a fill solution in this example. We go to bond. See, remember we said before, anything that's not level or equal, you select anything else. We have to have some kind of revenue constraints that we're going to either solve proportional, deferred, accelerated. And I want to go back to enter dates. So we can start to enter in, let's say 7/1/26, 7/1/65. Let's say it's the 4.2. A lot of times it's not going to be the same amount. It may be different amounts, but just to kind of show you as an example, right? So you can say, okay, is that feasible? Now let me do let's just see how much. That's the thing about fill solutions. So think about this. When it's level, when it's, if we go back here and I just do level, right? The job is level debt service, right? And your rounding is less than a bond, right? That's that objective. Fill is, its objective is to maximize proceeds with the available revenues. So what happens is, generally your rounding amount, your contingency, is going to be a large positive or a large negative number. Because remember, your goal is to maximize proceeds given what revenues are entered, right? It's not, that means it wouldn't be maximized if also it needs to have a contingency rounding amount less than a bond. That's when you then do like deferred or accelerate. And I'll show you. So no formula, that's fine. I just say additional proceeds greater than. So let's focus on a couple of reports here. Net debt service bond solution. So an fill solution. This is saying maximize proceeds. This is the amount of par that's needed, right? So the problem is you also hard coded a project fund amount. Given the funds, the deposits, and the issuance, it's short 3.368 million. That's the difference. Now, you can find, if you're able to, you can go back to the project fund and say, no, I want to set it to excess proceeds. So this will get added on and then you won't have any contingency. But this is just to kind of show you before doing anything. And you go, well, how do I know what the 120? Here we go. Here's the bond. See down here, the 126.90. It takes, given the adjustments, given the revenues that we entered, unused revenues, that's just the difference between the total debt service, adjusted debt service, adjustments from the from the draws and the earnings and the release of the funds. It should be less than one bond, and it is. It's not over from the smallest to the largest. You don't see it greater than 5,000. That can also be viewed as savings when we get to the refund scenario. Okay. So that's why this bond solution is going to at least tell you. Now, what happens a lot of times is somebody will, it won't be 4.2, it won't be great enough. It'll be too small, right? And because by default, the program is trying to fill, you're telling it, I want a fill to 4.2 million within a bond of debt service, 26 through 65, right? This works, but that's not going to always happen. And just to kind of give you, let's say it's something like, let's see if this, I'm going to do something extreme just to show you. Oh, you'll see not all revenue constraints were filled, possibly because there may not be enough monies to pay interest in the earlier. Okay, and you go, all right, let's look at that. Whoa, you go, why is it only 31? See how it stopped? Most of the time, then clients will say, that's fine. I want it to fill to the final maturity, but and that's okay if I blow the constraint in earlier years. But the program's not going to automatically do that for you, right? Because what it assumes is if I bond for one more bond, that interest added is going to exceed the revenue constraints, right? You add the interest of any one, if you hard coded an extra bond, that interest that pays out in 26 or 27 is going to be greater than, that will blow the fill. That's not a fill solution. So what can you do? Well, if you can't make any change, then I'll say, look, you can't. If you really want to bond through final maturity, the interest alone, even with the adjustments, is going to be greater than 300,000. I mean, think of all the bonds that you need, the interest, and then you go, that's fine. That's fine. Okay. So how can I exclude certain maturities from the solution process? And you could go back here. You uncheck restrict periods without open maturities, click protect maturity dates. This is where you can so now when I calculate, oh, maybe not. Let's see. Oh no, it'll work. So look, actually you could do, you could bond in that first year because of the release. I think that will work. So I think it's just 7-1. Let's see. Yeah, here we go. So you can see if you bond all the way to final maturity, the interest alone with the adjustment is going to produce 1.956 million, which is greater than the 300,000 in this example. All right. Ooh, I'm going to do access here just to show you. So that's why on the net debt service, and we'll, if you don't ever look at the bond solution, right? Just to reiterate, if I go back and you set it up like this, and you don't view the bond solution report, this, what does that tell you? That's not going to tell you, you just go, well, why isn't it not filling? Hopefully, if you view the bond solution, you go, oh, wow, the interest already, ooh, this revenue constraint is too low. Maybe it was a mistake, maybe it wasn't, but then you go, I can't include this in the solution. It has to basically ignore. That's when you would go type in that 7127. Or you just go, oh, no, I didn't. That was earlier on. It was, let's say it's at 4. Let's say it's at 38. As you can see, if it's okay and see, that worked. Usually it's really going to be dependent. You may have a lot and then it might be very small in the middle. It may be a very small amount. Well, then you're going to run into problems potentially because, again, filling, it cannot, unless you exclude it from the solution process. When you say fill, you're saying in no year do I want the total debt service to be greater than. Now you can always do, and then there's coverage factors, right? Where you can say 7126. You could say you may get this, or on a 110 or 125. Obviously, you're going to get now because, and again, you have to kind of calculate it. It's like, okay, well, how do I know this is at the coverage, right? How do I know? You're just given whether it's debt service or net debt service. Well, revenue constraints are only going to show up in the bond solution, or if you solve it in a project finance universal bond solution report, that's the only reports that's going to show your revenue constraints and your debt service comparable to it. So notice how it's a lot less debt service because you want to meet that 1.25 coverage. Right? Now, the kind of the last, at least debt size I want to go over is when you pull in existing debt service, and then we can take a break and then get to the refund. So there's a couple of ways that you're going to have existing debt service that you want it apart and you want to structure around existing debt service. And it really depends on where the source is of your existing debt service. So it may be, you've either created it as an actual series, or all you have are the maturity dates, the principal amounts, and the coupons, but you don't know what the interest is. Well, yeah, I mean, you could, if you want to calculate the interest, do all that on your own, you can, or the program can do it, or you may just have a cash flow. And so I'm going to show you the two different ways that you can add / create existing debt service and then pull it or import it into a series to get some kind of a wrap level aggregate solution. So what I'll go back to the new money. I'll go copy 2000. And again, this is covered, I believe, in the tutorial. All right. So first off is, let's say you've already created the actual series, or the information you're given is, you got the coupons and you got the principal amounts. All right. Well, you can't really add that into a series and then it will backtrack or try to figure out, it needs to know what the coupons are in order to calculate interest, right? So really won't backtrack in that. So let's say we'll create series. Let's say it is a 20. Existing debt service. Status, I'm only going to put actual. In this case, when you use the debt service calculator to export into a series, it will show all. But this is also going to be, I think, important for when we do the refunding. So I'm going to, status actual. Okay. Right. And we'll kind of stick with the same thing. Let's say it was 7/1/2020, and then 1/1, right, 2021. Right? And all the bond, might be just serial bonds. It may be a combination, might be cabs, convertible cabs. I'm just gonna serial. Let's just say it's 60. Because the main part about this is, you kind of at this point kind of know how to set up a bond component. And serial bonds don't have to make any changes. And I would also, I know these bonds have, quote, retired. It's obviously it's 2025 now. It's going to pull into a 7/1/2025. The bonds that mature prior, they're gone, they're retired. I would always input everything because, for example, let's say cabs, that's going to accrete from the original dated or delivery date, for example. Basically, when you start like cutting stuff out, then you can end up running into, oh, wait, did I remove past, or let's say you updated the dated delivery. That's not the original dated delivery date. Well, what if they're cabs? It needs to accrete and calculate correctly from those original dates. So I would, to me, the more you use it, you're really not saving any time anyway. So if it's 7/1, let's say 21 to 7/1/60 annual, I'm just going to put, I don't know, let's say 3. So you'll have all this. You'll have, in this example, what the principal amounts are, what the coupons and yield, price, all that kind of stuff. You're going to know what that is. You can't just hard code that into a series. Like basically, you can't hard code that in as like a cash flow, right? Because you don't know what the interest. You want the program to calculate what the interest is going to be. So let's say it's plus 0.012. Let's say something like that. And then I'm going to base, you're going to, and again, if it's in Excel or you have to hard code it, you'll calculate or you will paste this information. I'm just going to make it, obviously, it's not going to be the same issue amount all the way down. It's not really important. This is more or less how do I pull in existing debt into a proposed series in order to wrap around and produce some kind of an aggregate solution. So we could, we'll get to the call table on that. Save. Now, if I get out there and go back, okay, we don't need the fill or the new money. Go back and open. Now here's our wrap, right? And now we want to pull in existing debt from, right, that 2020 series. Go to the debt service calculator, click on it. You can open it up. You can shade in. That'll export the entire amount. Now you may, just like in a refund, I'll show you, there might be certain amounts. Let's say in 7127, you don't want to pull in $1 million. You want to pull in 500,000 of it. You can do that. And we'll get into that. But for this example, even though these bonds have retired, they've already matured, right? The 7121, 22, and so forth. That's fine. Export. I'm going to call it 2020. Now, let's say you've got multiple, 2020, 2019, 2018, if you select them all at once, the problem is it's only going to show up as one column in the aggregate debt service. Most client that you want to see it broken out. So you will have to do this one at a time. If you've got a 2020, 2019, 2021, basically you've got 5 different other debt service type or existing series. You want to do this one at a time. That way, when you click create, look how it automatically calculates the interest based off the coupons. Here's the 40 million. Now, a lot of this won't be included because it's already retired, right? You click OK. Now, that's if you know what the principal amounts are going to be and the coupons, right? Sometimes you don't have that. Sometimes you're like, look, I had the interest amounts. I have the principal amounts. Can I create an actual series? Well, no, it can't. You can't plug that in and then it figures out what the coupons are needed to achieve that. And so you have basically a cash flow. You have some, it might be in Excel, it may not be. You have the amounts. You don't have the coupon rate. You don't have the rates, yields, price. How do I enter that in? You go, okay, kind of in the same, go to additional info menu, other debt service. Let's just say, and this is I'm just going to say 2019 other, and you can, whatever the long name is going to be, it's going to show up as a column title in the aggregate debt service report. And you click create and kind of stick with the same thing. Let's just say it's 7120, right? And then 71, I don't know, 60, I don't know, 59 or whatever it happens to be. Now, if you already have it in Excel, you can copy and you can paste it. You may know what the principal, you may only know the debts are. Basically, what any kind of information you have, you type that, or you can copy and paste. Again, if it's kind of sticking with the same thing, if it's let's say it's just 500,000. And you don't know what the interest, but let's say the debt service, what the debt service happens to be. Or you could just say whatever. You can copy paste. This is only if you want to be like the other debt service reports broken out to show. But this kind of covers both ways. One, you can create it as some kind of series. You can just shade it in, click export one at a time, right? Or if it's not created, whether you just don't want to create it or you don't have enough information and it's just some kind of cash flow, you go to other debt service, give it a short and long name, and then you type all that in, right? Now, if you calculate it, and do nothing. And let me just, I'm gonna put this NA just so we can kind of focus on just this existing debt service. Um, and see if it's feasible. But if you pull that or hard code that information in and do nothing else, it's going to show up. Well, here, let's do it. I'll do calculate. That's fine. Here's some important, I think. So we got the bond solution. Now let's see what the aggregate debt service report. So you'll view this. You it's pretty much like we've seen before. This is what happens a lot, right? Say, I don't understand. Why is it not level? I I I pulled in correctly the other debt service. That's not level. Look at the bond solution. It's level debt service. See, if you view the bond, you'll notice, oh, I didn't include it. How do I include it? Or I forgot. Well, once you pull it in, that doesn't mean it's going to wrap around to try and produce level aggregate debt service. In this case, you have to go in here, activate wrap around other debt service. Make sure those. Yep. Now you view it. Again, doesn't really tell us much. Now 6.5. So as you can see, as long as you make the correct the correct um, option changes, and it's feasible. So for example, our project fund, let's say you typed it in as 25 million. Well, it's going to probably be hard to produce level aggregate debt service, including, you know, um, 76, 77 million in existing debt. But as you can see here, if you do everything right and it's feasible, you don't have to view the solution report. But you can see here's the existing, the 76,914 is the other debt service. And as you can imagine, if you start including the adjustments of the funds and stuff like that, you'll see that as a separate column. So that's why I think this bond solution is an important report, just because it's at least going to show you, did you include everything or not? In this case, we did. But again, and we get this a lot, um, if it's calculated, and let's say doesn't really matter the draws, but let's just say it's 10 million. No, bond solution does not meet all requirements. So we'll get this a lot. Now, sometimes we'll get this in much larger numbers. Sometimes the existing debt service can be over $1 billion, and their project fund is, two or 300,000. They're like, how come this isn't level? And it's like, well, let's see. You only need about 11.3 million to fund a 10 million project fund, and the issuance expense in the funds. So you can see here, it's not level all the way. This is showing you, so this is kind of important. Bond solution report. This is level, and that's another thing. When you try to solve it, level debt service, it will attempt to, in every year that has principal amount, produce level debt service. So this is level aggregate starting in 55, the 2.178. And you go, well, why? Well, only need 11 million. I've got almost 8 times that amount in existing debt service. So you can't look, the interest alone is greater in a lot of these years, right? From 54 back, the interest of the proposed series plus the existing debt service exceeds. That's why it is not, that's why it's not possible. Okay. Um, so I think that's why a lot of times the bond solution, it can easily get overlooked or kind of just viewed as, oh, it's not really a big deal. Or it doesn't make sense. I think it's more than anything, it can just be viewed as, well, I don't quite know what it is. But as you can see, you just need a larger amount in order to the interest, the principal plus the interest plus the existing debt service gives you some kind of an overall level aggregate wrap solution. So I think that's the key thing. View the debt service, net debt service, aggregate debt service. If you make all the right switches, option changes, and it's feasible, then it's gonna give you what you want, whether it's a fill, whether it's level, accelerated, deferred, you're fine. But if not, I would say more times than not, if you view the bond solution, at least I would say initially, is it including everything you want it to be included, whether it's reserve fund, cap I, existing debt service? And if it is, then it still may be confusing. And then you go, well, I don't really know. And you send us your file. But it may not. It may be like, oh, I didn't even include the existing debt service. Like I showed you at the beginning, we pulled it in, we exported, we hard coded, but we have to then click on. And sometimes clients will say that I just want to export. I don't want it to wrap. I want to show it included, but I don't want it. I don't want it to wrap around because by default it's not activated. See, so if you don't activate it, you calculate. That's why it's, hey, I pulled in the existing debt service. I am not getting level aggregate. What is going on? And then you'll go here and you go, where is it? Oh, wait a minute. That's right. I didn't. I have to activate wrap around other debt service, then calculate, right? And then you'll see now it's 10.4 all the way down. More importantly, solution, it shows the existing debt. Now, it doesn't break out existing debt in this report, but the 76,914, if you ever want to know an easier way, again, access. Like if I highlight these two and I right mouse click and go total, 76,914, 500. 76,914, 500. You guys want to take a break? Let me see. No, it doesn't break. Oh, I know we've been now going for 2 hours and 20 minutes. Do you guys want to take maybe a 15-minute break? Does that sound good? So it's 12:45. How about 15 minutes? So at the top of the hour. It's right now, what is it? 12:45 Eastern time, 11:45 Central. So in 15 minutes. Does that sound good?
Yeah, sounds good.
Or I can keep going. Great. Okay. So yeah, why don't we all reconvene? The refunding won't take as long, only because I showed I'll make another refunded series. It may seem like it's a lot more complicated than it really is. It's just because there's a number of parts, but it should not take as long. So yeah, see you in 15 minutes, guys. 760. All right. I think everybody is back. And okay, so now we have the refund set up. And I don't know if everybody has created one, but it don't, I think sometimes if you're just starting off, it can feel like it might be a little intimidating, only because instead of the wraparound, when we did a fill, when we did a level debt service, it was just a series, right? Now, wraparound, we had to kind of either create and export existing debt. But in a refund, everything is going to be calculated through the refund case. And what needs to be a part of the refund case, unless it's a cash defeasance where you're not going to issue any new bonds, but how do I set up a refund or a typical refund? You're going to have obviously refunded bonds, typically created as an actual series, um, typically callable. And so you're going to have whether it's one or multiple refunded series. And then you're going to have new debt that you're going to issue, proposed refunding series. And everything's going to be attached. So the proposed refunding is going to be attached to the refund case. And then you're going to attach, in a way, the existing debt or the refunded bonds. What bonds do you want to defease? And then to produce escrow, the only way you can produce any kind of escrow, any kind of purchasing of slugs or open markets is through the actual refund case. Okay. So it may seem a little intimidating at first, but in essence, it really isn't. Because by default, when we create a refund case, it will automatically create a an attached proposed refunding series. Okay. And that series, all you need to do is put in the new debt information, for example. But then back in the refund case is where we can, attach or select bonds that we want to refund. And then hopefully produce some kind of structure, um, a, a saving structure. So let me just save this, okay, and make sure. Oh, someone needs to be let in. That is okay. So we go back here, and I know this was the existing debt. I'm actually going to edit. Say admit. I'll say about it. It can be existing or refunded. So let's say in this example, we have that 2020, or you would create it, and I'll show you, we'll recreate it from scratch. It's going out to 2060. Now, typically, these bonds are callable. So how do we set that up? Well, it's kind of a two-part process because you can create as many different call tables as you want. You may have more than one bond component. It's rare, but I've seen it sometimes where the bond components may have different call provisions set up. So there's a two-part. One is let's create it. Let's just call it call, right? And then we could say, let's say 10 years out, 7/1/30 at par. Right? Now, you may have multiple call dates that you can enter in with different call prices. You just enter all that in here. Now, just because you enter it, and just because you can see it, that doesn't mean these bonds are not callable. You have to go into the call provision setup and link it. Because again, what if you create more than one call table? Well, then there's not an automatic feature for them to be called. You have to select the bond component to the appropriate call table. Any dates that call may not fall on an interest payment date. You may want it to. You can select. I would say the number of days notice. This is always helpful if, get this a lot, your call happens to fall on or prior to the proposed refunding dated or delivery date, right? Let's say these are very old. And let's say you put your call table is, July 1st, 2024. Well, if you don't put a number of days notice, they will be called on delivery. And then you'll go, if you put a 30 days notice, then obviously it's going to be 30 days from the DD of the proposed refunding series. But again, a lot of times you'll have that in the OS. It'll tell you if there's, a number of days notice. It may be 30, it may be more. But in this case, the call table is 2030. So that's not really necessary. So we created that. Let's do another one though. So I'll create a series, and then I'll just say it's, I don't know, 2015. I'll just do 2018. The main thing here, if it is actual series, again, it's not going to calculate it any differently. But when we get to the actual refund case and we want to select bonds to refund, it has to have a status of actual or actual refunding, but it's more times than not, you're going to select actual. And again, if I kind of stick with same thing, it doesn't matter. You just I would say, put in the original date, dated, delivered, whatever, first thing, so. So these can kind of stick with, let's say it's, I don't know, 30, 48, let's say. We keep it on serial. That's the default. And we can say 7/1/19, 7/1/48. Want to make sure and try to get some kind of savings out of this. So it probably would have been higher than that, but do something like that. And then again, this is information that you're going to have through OS. You're going to have this information at some point, whether it's, this is existing debt. So you're just going to have to hard code, or you can copy and paste from Excel, for example, And so here, I'm just going to, obviously it's not going to be the same all the way down, but you would hard code or paste that in. I'm doing that just so I can randomly put in numbers that'll just save time. But you get the idea. copy paste in here, or you just hard code it in, right? And this goes to 48. So let's have another term. Let's say 50. Here, let's say term bond. We're going to select term bond, and then 7/1, is at 49, I think, and then 7/155. I'm going to just do, let's just say it's all the way down the same. But again, you'll have that information. Let's just say it's 3/4. And again, you could have one, you could have two, you could have 50 actual series. It really depends on your refunding. But the point is that most likely you're going to create the actual series, right? Status actual. And you're going to do that one at a time. Now this, again, call detail 18. Let's say it's 7, again, 10 years out, 28 at par. But if it's not, you type that in. If it's at 101 or 100.5, and then the next is 7129 at par, you'd enter that in. And again, this is all also covered in the tutorials through help, tutorials, and you'll see there. And just to reiterate, in case you weren't here at the beginning, all of this I am recording. I'm going to edit afterwards. I'm going to put it, I created like a YouTube DBC finance site, and there's already a number of videos, a lot of them trainings, some of them not. Depending on how many people subscribe, how many people watch, it will kind of dictate whether or not, most of our clients like to watch and scroll through entire trainings, or some of my broken down shorter videos that, the more people that kind of know about it and sign up, then it's going to show me, okay, who went where, not who, but I mean, how many people went to which video for how long. And that, because to me, early on, I thought one of my real short ones was going to be real. It wasn't as, so far, it's not, I'm surprised. Some of the real long training ones have been watched a lot. So, and so I want to make sure and create more videos, if it helps you guys out, and I'll know that by what videos are being watched versus which ones are just being ignored. Um, but um, but anyway, so go in here. Remember, we created, these might have, one might not be callable. One might have different call dates. We can create another call table and have different call provisions. Two-part process. Now you have to click on setup. And you can select it. I'm going to keep it on any date. But again, your OS, a lot of times it'll say on there that, so the call date may not be on an interest payment date. And it may say in the OS, make sure that no matter what date you type in there, that it's on an interest payment date. So you'll make that change. And it may say there's at least 30 days. So you could still do 30 days. Now, this is more than 30 days. The call date, I believe, is, yes, it's more than 30 days. So, but that kind of saves you just in case, let's say the call table was 7/1, 25, right? And our new proposed refunding bonds, day delivery 7/1/25, right? Well, they're going to be called on delivery, cash. A lot of times you're going to want to purchase slugs. Slugs have to have 30 days from date of purchase to when they mature. So If you have 30 in there, then it will, right, call 30 days out from delivery. But in this case, it doesn't matter. Again, this is calling out 7/1/28. So the point is, you'll create, either yourself or somebody will have a bunch of different actual series that have been created. And the big thing to know is, if you're going to create the refund case here, it can't look at actual series here. Now, in the FAQ, I believe the tools section, it'll say, how do I copy? Like you could technically copy. If you type in the short name DEF, right? Here's a quick and dirty. The problem is it will copy everything. And if there's something already created under DEF that has the same short name, it'll tell you, do you want to replace it? And you probably don't. Say, documents in the source issuer will replace existing documents in the target issuer. Do you wish to continue? That means if there's a short name 2018 or 2020 already created, it will override it. If you go yes, see now, or if you go, I don't want to do that. I just want, let's see. See, there's not really a way to I could have deleted the entire issuer and then recreated it. But if you want to go, no, I just want to copy this 2018 file, save as, you can select, you can give it a different name, right? Or keep it the same. And if you click OK, now when you open, now you'll see it copied. And again, that's in the FAQ towards the bottom. I think it's under the tools questions. But so there's different ways of copying stuff. But the main thing I would say is knowing early on, I would say, just remember, if you start creating actual series, try and create in the same issuer the refund. If you create it in a different issuer, it can't, when we try to select bonds to refund, it's only going to look at anything actual under DEF issuer. It's not going to look at ABC. So then you'll have to go in here and copy, right? If you don't know that. So if you know that already, you go, oh, I got to make sure and either copy a bunch, copy all to another issuer, or just do it all at once. So going back to ABC County, click new. Now we're going to do refund case. Now you'll see a different icon. You notice this little green with the little dollar. And I'll just say 2000. Refund analysis. You'll see that appear. When I click back open, you'll notice 2025 REF. See, this is important. It used to, a long time ago, you couldn't do this. You had to have a different short name attached. And the problem was lots of clients said, hey, I've got 10 different refund cases. How do I know which proposed refunding is linked to which refund case without having to go in and through the refund case? It's real annoying. So now, by default, it creates this attached proposed refunding, so new debt. This is unless it's a cash defeasance. If you're doing a cash defeasance, you're not issuing any new debt, then obviously that's different. But now you'll see proposed refunding. If you go into it, it looks just like these actual series, right? Same kind of a deal, except it's proposed refunding. This is where we put our new assumptions in, right? So again, we'll go back to the 7/1/25. 1/1/26. And again, let's see, going to 55. Okay, we're going to 60. Let's just, for time's sake, I'm going to do serial 60, serial bonds through 2060. And then we could go 7/1/26, 7/1/2060. And you'll kind of go back to the 1%. Again, you may have to hard code. You may have it already in Excel or some kind of, you can copy and paste. There may not be any kind of a pattern. So something like that. And again, these may be, if they are discount or premium, you'll adjust 2 out of the 3 columns. So just to reiterate, I'll see this a lot, like 100.97, someone will type something like that, or accidentally, they do it, because you're typing in fast. And if you calculate, it's not going to give you an error. It'll just say, hey, warning, rate, yield, price, and on a maturity are all protected. Make sure and verify the reports that they're accurate. And a lot of times they're not. So whether it's that or it's go back to protect instead of hard code or something like that, let one column for particular maturity that you're hard coding. I would highly recommend leaving it unprotected. Let the program dictate. And then if you're trying to match numbers and you do that, and you're not getting it, and then you hard code every 3, and then you match, that's fine. But just remember, just look at the warning messages. So let's say we got that. We don't have a project. Let's say we don't have any fun. Let's say we do have the issuance. Remember the issuance expense that we created? Let's say we have issuance expenses. And again, anything you create, it could be a bond component. It can be project funds. I just noticed it more. I noticed that clients seem to like it the most if they do want to save something and retrieve it, regardless of the data file existing in the future. It seems like itemized expenses, whether it's issuance or, individual ones that they have to always, that they love copy, tools, component gallery, paste it. That way they can always click, double click, click create, and all they have to do is just go in here. Because it may be, the description might be a lot longer, might be very specific. And it's like, do I have to repeat this? If there's anything you feel like I have to do this over and over and over and over and over, I would say try to save it in the component gallery. That way, maybe the description, you don't have to type those in again. The only thing you have to change is just the formulas. Saves you time, right? So I'm going to do all that. I can either, sometimes I like to just get out. So here's the 2020, 2018. Okay, now we're back in the refund case. I'll say this, if you haven't done this, how do I download, open markets, slugs? Obviously you need, and depending on the firm, some firms are like, no, we have one person that downloads and they save it to a particular directory. If they do, if it's on a shared drive, then, and someone tells you, hey, I download the open market securities, and say it's someone in your IT, when we download the slugs or whatever, and it's on some kind of shared drive, or they tell you whatever it is, you just go to tools preferences, you can click on this and then go look at, okay, it's on shared F drive or whatnot. If you're able to just do it on your own, that's great. Just know that anything, whether it's a component gallery, anything that's shared or it's on some kind of a shared drive, and if other people have access to it and they're able to make changes, like you created that issuance expense and you saved it as in a component gallery, and other people at your firm have access and they go in and they delete it, right? Now, if you already have it in one of your files, or one of your data files, your series, you can always recreate, right? It's already there as an icon. You can right click, go copy, go back. So obviously, depending on your firm, what they allow, what they maybe don't allow, um, um, will dictate whether or not you can just, you know, link it. You could create on your own, on a local, or you create it, or you link it to some kind of a shared drive. You just do it tools preferences in this section. And this also goes for, if they tell you we have all these report packets already, here's where you go. Well, you go down here and you would search component gallery down here. So we have already created the proposed refunding, the bonds, issuance expense, so forth. How do we pull in the refunded bonds? When we click on detail, I'm just going to keep it long, click create. And so, how do we do this? Well, there's a couple ways. Select bonds. So you remember, anything with actual status will appear in that issuer, ABC County. If it's not, if you go, oh my God, where's the 2020? Again, you click open, you click that and you could go edit, and here's the status. You would make sure and then select that it's actual. Okay. So going back here, there's two ways of pulling this in. One, kind of like we did on the existing debt. You could come in here and go, okay. See, I'd click it to its half and I click on the zero. If you know a couple that I don't want to refund 2.1, it's 1 million, you can come in here and it's a little time consuming. I would prefer, or I would say, shade it in, select it all. Now, you may go, yeah, but we're not refunding this term bond. Well, then you would just deselect it, right? If you select all of it and then go to input bonds. So we've already shaded in bonds we want to import. Flip it to input bonds, click on the ... select import. This really is only needed if you want to refund a specific amount per maturity or a percentage. So if you say, look, I want to refund 85%, how do I do that? Well, select all the bonds that you want to refund, flip it to input, go in here, click import, right mouse click, you can go to modify times 0.85, right? And it's going to tell you 108,375 out of 127,500,000. Or yes. So I would say this isn't always used. The other problem is if you make any changes in any bonds series you select, in this case, the 18 and the 20, you have to kind of do this all over again. And that means you change the call date, you changed up any kind of rate or refunded or principal amount. It doesn't automatically update. So you'd have to basically go back here, go import, go Yes. And you'll see the updated. Sometimes that happens with call tables. I've noticed clients will go, I don't know why my bonds are being called on this date. You can clearly see in 2018 and 2020 my call date. Why is it different? Well, I'll go in here and I'll see it and I'll say, oh, did you have a different call date? Oh, yeah, I had it before. It was a different call date. Okay, well, you have to import and then start over. So most times it's going to be, the default select bonds. You're going to select the bonds you want to refund, right? And you're going to click OK. It's going to be really as simple as that. I'll show you in a moment, funds on hands. This is really more for the advanced. But so as you can see, I think people get a little intimidated by the, again, length of the tutorial. And they go, oh, all these moving parts. Not really. You just create a refund case, right? You just select, click, create the refund case. When you do that, it does the work of automatically, used to be, quote, old days, you had to also then create a proposed refunding series and then link it. Now you don't even have to do that. It'll automatically create. You go in here, you put in all your new information, right? Your proposed, come back, create prior debt, select the bonds you want to refund. Now, by default, slugs. You'll see current, right? June 18th, right? That's only because I downloaded today's date or the latest slugs, right? Um, Current does not automatically mean that it's, in this case, the 18th of June. It means, let's say the last time you downloaded, and let's say you're not linked in tools, preferences to some kind of a shared slug folder, shared drive slug folder. You do it yourself. Well, if you keep it on current, basically, like, let's say that I open up this refund case a week from now, right? When I train the advanced class or the project finance class, if I keep it on current, it's going to be running off of the 18 June 25 slugs, not off of the June 25th slugs. So current just means the newest slug file you downloaded or that it's linked to, right? And this is where sometimes you can get a little confused that you think, like, let's say someone is like, hey, we download, let's say it's IT or whoever tells you, yeah, no, we download all the slugs. It's on a shared, it's all up to date. Well, if you don't link it to it and you have let's say you did it on your own, but it was a month ago and you have it on current, you need to click on that down arrow. That will tell you, because it gets saved, it gets saved twice. It's a 18 June 25 .slug SLG file and a current .slug file, right? So that way, tomorrow when I download and I click on this, you'll see current, you'll see 19 June 25, then 18 June 25. So let me just show you. So I can do here, SCCS button, slug. You can do a historic. So I could do, oh, it's been installed. Okay, desktop. So, all right, this will be a good example. Let me just see slug files. Yeah, so why don't I do this? I'll just delete it. Okay. So I'm running my numbers. I'm current. I'm like, yep, I have it, such and such my firm, they have it, they downloaded. You think you're linked. to the shared drive where they tell you, through tools, preferences, you aren't, or you're directed to an incorrect path, or you thought, no, you thought you downloaded. It says current, and this is next week or even today. And then all of a sudden I'm like, I'm not getting the same numbers as somebody else who's using this. A lot of times in a refunding, it's, are you using the same, slug file? That's always my first thing. And I would, if you're trying to match number, why is so-and-so coworker getting a different slug or getting a different escrow? I would say, first thing, click on that down arrow. Look, 17 June. And they're using 8 now on the reports. On a couple of the escrow reports, it'll say at the bottom, here's the slug file you're using, right? So what do you do? Well, first, let me just go back. So as you can see, current means the newest, most latest download that you, or whether it's linked and you downloaded it or somebody else. It does not mean, quote, today, the current. So I go back. I'm going to say, let me just, I'll just go back and do current. Okay. Now, there's a couple of things that you may or may not want to do. If you select 18 June 25, first off, it's not ambiguous, right? Like if you have it on current, you don't really know what current may mean unless you click on the down arrow or go to file, slug files, right? I just had it linked to my desktop, right? So it's showing me, here's the two. If you select 18 June 25, just note that if I run the numbers next week, I have to just make sure I have it set in stone. I will say this, we have sometimes clients will say, hey, this was a done refunding. And I needed to go back and reprint some reports. Why are the numbers all different? This was 6 months ago. Like what? I almost guarantee at that time when everything was done, it was current. Well, 6 months later, they've been downloading slug files, right? Well, they're using a new slug file, new rates, very different than 6 months ago, depending on how the market. So I always say, well, you need to go, and that can be more difficult sometimes, depending if they didn't report, they didn't print out all the reports or they think these were the numbers. So I always say, look, me personally, if you select it, it stays in stone until you change it. So if it's kind of a done deal, and then you're thinking, I may have to come back and run the numbers or print the reports out for whatever reason. If I keep it on current, then how do you just got to make sure that you have enough reports printed out and that it shows which slug file you use. So the good thing is you keep it on whatever it's set in stone. The only bad thing is if you forget and you're running numbers next week, you've downloaded new slug files and you haven't made that change here. So just know that. All right. So in this section, by default, slugs. And again, F1 gives you a lot more information. By default, new delivery date, you can always change that. Which file, slug rate file. I'm going to select that. And again, or current, just know. If it's open market securities, that's generally, you have to have a login. For open markets, you get a certain amount of, I believe, downloads per branch. And if your firm's totally cool with you doing that and you don't have the info, all you need to do is just, I would say, request, even if it's send us a file, say, hey, I just need to get the OMS information. We will send you a link or a password where you can enter it in through tools, preferences, internet settings. Once you do that, again, just like slugs, you can download, Now they need to do the 17th, right? So that's where you do it, all in this SCCS. And then even more detail, it's, you can filter out where you're only selecting certain types. If it is open markets, I don't want agencies or only want bills, bonds, notes, or, certain allowable T-strip maturities. QSIP, you can say include certain, you can exclude certain. This helps, like if you're trying to match someone's numbers and they have their QSIPs, and you're like, I don't want to potentially purchase all these different types of, even if it's, let's say it's a bond, but they're all bonds, but the QSIP, well, it may choose different bonds if it's a more efficient escrow. And you're like, no, I'm trying to match. I would always just say, oh, you could just go in and QSIP. You just type them in one at a time and you'll click on the up and it'll say include. You won't have anything except for it, and it will just purchase those. So, but again, that's a little bit more nuanced or whatnot. So we have the new information. We've already entered that. We've already selected the refunded bonds, right? Savings assumption. I would say more times than not, if you run the numbers and you want to show something different in include or exclude in the savings report, like you may have a reserve fund, a new reserve fund that you go, no, I want to show the cash flow of it. Now, this one doesn't have a new reserve fund. Well, you make that change, or I have future expenses. I don't want to include it. You uncheck. Or rounding. I don't want to include that. So when we calculate, there's going to be kind of, three options. NA obviously means it's not applicable. It's not going to be included. But in a savings report, you'll see a PV cash flow section. And then after that, you'll see a summary section at the bottom, right? Summary is up front. If you want it in the PV section, it's a cash flow delivery, whether it's upfront or cash flow. The thing is, savings report, you can manipulate that pretty much any way you want. You can solve it, for example, on a net basis solution, but the savings isn't solved on a net basis. So there's an FAQ on it. It can get very kind of complex. So, but I'm gonna show you all that. It's not too much left in the training. Save that. So savings assumptions, again, you can really manipulate that. I mean, you could technically not even include your prior debt. You could instead put in some kind of a cash flow. You know, um, the solution report is really the report to look at first, and then you want to see if that matches up with your savings. And I'll show you that. Portfolio, a lot of times you're only going to need to create a portfolio if you know the security information and you'd have to know, like, fine, type of bond, par amount, what's either the purchase yield or the purchase price. Make sure you know the right interest class, interest frequency, and so forth. Because if you don't change these, it's not going to automatically change for you. Now, you may not know what the par amount is. That's when you have to go back here and you would select available, click on the dot, 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 and you can see you can enter information in there. Again, that's a little more, you know, um, maybe more for the quote like project finance class. But reporting options, just like in the proposed refunding series, you can have, additional titles, footnotes. Again, whether it's all, you can just say the alternate text you don't like in a particular report, how DBC has worded something, if it's specific or all reports, just remember the original text. You know, if it's, you know, only the first word, letter of each word is capitalized, you need to make sure and do that. Another thing is, and we'll come back to this, but sometimes column titles fall on two different rows. And that's when you have to use this symbol, which is usually it's the shift, and it's a key that's around your return or back, you know, it's usually on the top right somewhere. It's usually below the enter key or backspace. It's the up and down. I don't know if it's called a pipe, but it's usually like on mine, it's shift. But um, that's needed when it falls on two different rows. And I'll show you what I mean. It's a little bit clearer once we run the numbers. Finally, I would say, you know, I'm sure it's a programming thing. Obviously, the default, in my opinion, should be uniform, which is level savings. Level debt service just means it. We're not looking at prior debt. We're not looking at your refunded debt. We just want level current proposed refunding debt. So it's not structuring any kind of savings, right? Uniform it will take what? Now, remember we said if it's not level, it's not equal, there has to be some kind of revenues. And we did that, remember, in the fill example, right? Where we needed a certain amount of debt service in these years. Well, in a refund case, which you know, because this different icon, it's a little R, you'll notice something different. Include prior debt. Yes. So by default, bonds that we select to refund, that debt service is going to be used. That's going to be the quote, you know, the revenue constraints. And we're hoping, giving our new setup, our proposed refunding bonds, given, you know, the coupons and stuff like that, hopefully will produce some kind of level savings. Old debt, if it's 2 million a year, hopefully the new debt will be 1 million a year, and we save $1 million a year, for example. We don't have a ongoing or reserve fund, so it doesn't really matter if we make any changes. It's going, you know, this is just kind of a straight up refund. We're not including, or you could, if you want to include, you may have additional, kind of like we did that wrap. Sometimes you may have additional debt service you want to export in. You do that in the proposed refunding series. But by default, you don't have to make any changes, meaning, you know, the default isn't no, you know, it's yes. Now, sometimes clients will early on, I don't know, they'll do yes, and then they'll come down here and they'll enter, you know, they'll say, here's what I want. I want, you know, whatever, say through 60, kind of like before. I want, you know, I want the revenue constraints to be 4.2 million. Why is it? See, they don't view the bond solution report. They'll say, I don't understand why my savings is so off. It seems like it's a lot higher than this. Well, go to the bond solution. They'll notice it's not 4.2, it's adding 4.2 million and the prior debt service. So it's easy to kind of overlook that if it's unprotected, right? So what I just say, oh, you want it 4.2? Okay. Well, you better make sure and select no. Now in your savings report, you better have, instead of your prior debt service, it better be this cash flow, right? To compare. Because revenue constraints basically is going to be whatever your prior debt is. Or if it's some kind of an amount, make sure this will add to that. Yes, plus this, right? So that's kind of the key takeaway, right? So the rest we know. Okay, so we did that. Save, calculate. One or more refunded bonds mature on or before the delivery date. Remember when we created the actual series? And I said, yeah, it's probably a little bit more work, but it's probably always best. Even if we didn't shade in the bonds that matured on or before. Now, there's a way to include bonds that mature on. That would be in this PRI advance. Exclude bonds maturing on delivery date. Every once in a while, we'll get support message saying, "Hey, I've got a bond that's maturing on seven, on seven. In this example, 7/1/25. How can I include it?" Well, PRI advanced and uncheck that. Or I have a BAB subsidy. I created that in the actual series. How do I include it? Here we go. Prior ongoing expenses. You would activate that. So that's in the PRI advance. But again, warning message or just warning. Part of me sometimes kind of fought on not having that warning message because it's kind of like sometimes clients can go, "What is this all about?" And they get worried. It's like, no, it just means you selected bonds that have already matured on or before the delivery dates. That's not going to be included, right? Oh, okay. So you click OK. It gives you click OK. Bond solution does not mean all, likely not optimized. So we go, OK. Let's see. Let me just make sure. No. Oh, I think because we went out to 60. Let's make sure. Oh, wow. Oh, yeah. I think it's probably here. Let me just copy down. This still may not matter. I want to at least get us. Oh, what is that? Oh, it's because I know. Here, 18, 20. I think it's okay, 60. Here, I'm just going to do a term 60. Actually, yeah, 7/1, 50, 7/1, 60. I'm just going to do 4. I'm going to do 2. Okay. So if I do that, now that might have caused. Okay. Okay. There we go. Okay. So summary refunding results, savings, summary bonds refunded. To that, we saw the pricing, bond stats. That's fine. Aggregate, fine. Bond net, prior debt service. Let's see. Reserve, cap buy. Let's do the. Now, real quick, I'm going to do all these escrows. In print preferences, you probably will have some hidden reports. For example, there's a generic reserve fund report, but there's also individual debt service and capitalized interest fund. I would suggest also, first thing, tools, preferences, internet settings. You put all your under the email section. The other is you can also go tools, preferences, scroll to the bottom. This is without ever having to calculate anything. Go to report preferences. go to available reports, and you can start clicking on the different modules, and you can see hidden. So you probably will have the debt service, the capitalized, other reserve fund, and you can go down to the different, see the bond maturity statistics. Okay. And you can just go through which ones you want to select or not. Okay. So bond, going through that, it's going through that. Okay. These are kind of more focused on the refund specific, because it's going to have most, if not all, of the debt size. See a little different: cash, slug escrow, contingency. Right? And again, summary of your funding results, where you'll get the percentage of the savings of the refunded bonds. You get the average life, the new and old average life, and average coupon, refunded savings. Here, let me put that. I would say this, and we get a lot of, how come, annual savings might be greater or less than. Just remember, why is that not showing? Hold on, let me make sure. Okay. I want to make sure. Expanded. Oh, present value. Just make sure. Okay. Now, sorry, some things were changed. Just remember, when it concerns present value savings, if you view it annual, you can't, it's hard to verify, right? Because present values each cash flow back to 7/1/25 in this example. So it's not cash flowing back the 1201, because we have semi-annual interest. That way, if you verify, understand you want to do it annual because you want to see the annual savings and it looks great. But you also make sure, if you need to verify, make sure it goes, you revert back to a continuous frequency, because you may have, if you refund multiple actual series, refunded series, they may have different dates, right? It's not going to be this example where it's every January and July. So you may get some kind of funky present value when you see it annual, and you have to go back to continuous because you have to present value back each cash flow within that year, right? And that each one PV back, then combined gets you this, right? So this isn't like, oh, it present values this, everything from on 7/1/26 back to seven. No, it's every seven, in this case, the 1/1, if it's 1/1/26, and then 7/1/26, you present value, then it adds it together. So, whereas savings is just, right, it's just adding that together. But you'll see down here, here's remember, we can say other sources, other uses, select it NA if you want to exclude that. Here's our little note there. But again, savings report is not going to show you how it's structured. It's just going to show you, here's the prior, here's the new, here's the difference, and then it's going to PV it back each cash flow. But if you do all the right setting corrections like we talked about, then you will get, but it's the bond solution report. So you'll see here, these bonds obviously mature before the first call date. Oh, I forgot to do a call. See, that's why it's important. You go, oh, these didn't get called. I forgot to select the call table. Yep. Now here's prior debt service. These are just the old, the actual series combined, the 117,800. And again, I can make that annual if I wanted to. escrow requirements. Here, let me go back. Sorry. Only because and again, obviously, if you don't call these, then you're going to get an escrow requirements report that is going to go out pretty far, right? Because they're not being called. So you're going to have escrow requirements on those dates. Okay, so here's the bond. There we go. Now they're being called. Good. Prior debt. You'll see the stars. That just means you have you're combining and viewing it on an aggregate basis, the prior debt service. These on maturity dates have different coupons. So you have to either break that down or separate it out. But that, and again, you can always put a note on that, but that also explains it in the tutorial as well. Escrow requirements. Obviously, we have 7128 and 7130 are call dates, right? So you'll see huge. And these are obviously the bonds that mature prior to the call date. So you'll see the principal interest. You may not want rollovers. This happens a lot of times, and it really depends. It depends on what the rates are. It depends on, if you have a very low ARB yield, right? And let's say your slugs are quite high. Well, it needs sometimes to do the rollovers. Now, how do I potentially or hopefully you can do proportional? Sometimes that works. Well, let me see. Yeah, let's see. Now, I don't know. 1.2. That is so. Oh, I think it might have. There we go. Escrow requirements. Now you see it's a little different because we did a proportional. It wasn't before by default. It will purchase a lot of zeros to um, draw down and force that escrow yield to comply under the ARB yield. Obviously, if you go back to in the refund assumption setup, global proceeds escrow, and you select yield limit NA, then it's not restrictive. So to the ARB yield, but you'll see here, okay, that's fine. Shows you what your what. Oops, sorry about that. What's going on? Escrow requirements, okay, and then descriptions, cost, cash flow. And again, a lot of these reports can be modified. You can really break it out per slug purchase, and it's a pretty sufficient report, right? And here's this statistics. Now, real quick, I usually don't cover this in the regular, but more and more, you may have some kind of a transfer, whether it's or a contribution or P&I transfer or issuer contribution. You may have some money that can be allocated and be spent and applied towards the escrow, right? And then this will also lower your bond proceeds if you have an amount. So I could say, let's say it's a transfer, some kind of or a contingency or let's say a 2020 DS, a debt service fund or debt service reserve fund, whatever this amount that's going to be transferred, or you have some kind of contingency amount, and you're like, look, it's 100,000, and I want to apply it towards the escrow. How do I do that? Well, by default, anything changed in here, like if you said NA or you put in a specified percent, as soon as I'm going to put, as soon as you go in here and make any change, like you just go You just go, I'm going to give it an escrow name. That will disable that global proceeds escrow, and it will run off whatever you change in here or add in here. So 2020 DSF, select first. And again, F1, we tell you solution options, select how the escrow is to be invested with regards to the order which requirements are to be funded. We even say the options usually associated debt service reserve fund, proportional ratable, then debt service fund and select first, so forth. So you have some kind of money. See, global proceed escrow is not used and its settings ignored when all requirements are met by escrows and prior debt which have the solution. Yep. Okay. Now I'm going to break out alt detail, and I'll show you. Here we go. Escrow cost. Remember we had 100,000. We purchased slug, and then fill remaining with bond proceeds. And even in the statistics, it's broken out into two escrows here, right? And if we go back to the beginning, you will see other source of funds. So you don't need as much, right? If you have the 100,000 to 128,650, that gets reduced as well. So we go in a little bit more detail on this next week, but just know that if you ever have any kind of monies that or anything that's transferred, it's a prior reserve fund, prior fund, those don't automatically get transferred. So it doesn't really you could create it in the actual series. The only thing that can automatically get transferred or accounted for is prior ongoing expenses. But even then, sometimes it's better to create it in the proposed refunding and use other formulas, so to speak. So that's on this is kind of how you do a refunding. Real quick, and we can get going. If you have a quick and dirty, very easy, basic how-to setup, we call that Easy Agent. File, Easy Agent. You can go to Easy Agent or you can create a new bond issue. So I can click OK. It's very limited in scope. So I could say, XYZ issuer, XYZ, series. This is Easy Agent, Easy. And you'll notice it's only a few screens. So we do the dated, I could say, again, go with the 7/1/25 delivery. What's the first interest payment date? 26. Yeah, let's say it's on a 6/30 fiscal period, 6/30/26 or something. Principal, you have the options here. Let's say it's annual. Let's say it's first one is 7/1/26. Last serial 7/1. Let's say it's 56. First term 7/1/60. 7/1/65. I'm just to show you 70. Oh, not 1970. And so forth. And again, can I make these, well, yeah. Type of debt service, level, accelerated fill. These are your options. Let's do it level. Solve using debt service net of, sure, size, par. So let's just say coupon. Here, I'm just going to do it 1% all the way down because this is information you'll have. And the yields, right? And the price. Are they cabs? Are they callable? You can say yes or no. Term bonds, right? Here. I'm just putting in the different term bonds, right? 3 different term bonds. Are they cabs, callables, right? And then you go next. Let's just say it's 5, 250. Again, what if it's a percent of bond value? What if I have more info? No, this is enter only one value per line. Bond insurance. Sure. Interest flow. How about through 6/1/26? Our deposit accrued interest. Yeah, but there's no accrued interest. Other uses. Next. Construction fund. How about it? 300 million. Interest rate, you can make these change. And so first draw date, number of draws, and then you can calculate it, create series. And let's say I'm going to create let's do DEF County. Okay. Everything's created. Right? Go through here. You'll see the fiscal 250, 5. It's pretty wild. See, here's all the rates. So again, calculate. It's just a few. So this is easy agent. This is really, as you can see, you got a number of screens you can go through. If you then need to make more detailed, put more detail info, you can after the fact. If you just do very vanilla, this might be something you want to look at because it kind of it really handholds you a lot more than what I was showing you. Now, if you think, no, I'm going to be doing kind of complex stuff, I don't know I don't know how much this will be of value, but it may, you know. But as you can see, the bond solution is 10.9. It's level, right? So that's the easy agent. Sorry, guys, we ran a lot over. Um, I hope everybody learned something. Let's see. Wow, it's almost 4. It's almost 4 hours. Um, yeah, 3 hours and 51. Now we did take some time, about 15 minutes, but still, sorry for keeping you over. I will once this wraps up, then we'll try to at some point today or tomorrow do some editing, and then try to link it, and then I will send you guys a link. If for some reason you don't hear from me by Friday sometime, you can always shoot me an email. I don't know if you have my email or not. It's kboone@sscinc.com. So Cade is my first name, K. Boone, B as in boy, OONE. Here, let me see. Make this easier. Oop. Uh, 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 Here we go. Then bold it. Hopefully everybody can see that. kboone@sscinc.com. You can always shoot me an email if you don't see anything by Friday, at least a link. Even if I run into, if work gets super busy and I can't do editing, at least I'll be able to send you the link that you can see prior videos. You can subscribe if you want, look through, see what you like, what you don't. But yeah, and if you haven't done so and you feel like you're very comfortable with creating debt size refundings, and you are doing project finance and you haven't done so in um, you know help training request. This is where you can always sign up for, and it's next week. I would say if you haven't used project finance at all and you're still trying to learn debt size and refunding, I don't know how much you'll get out of it. But the main thing is, and I think some of you have signed up for the project finance class, but I don't know why that took forever. Okay, so here's obviously today. So yeah, a week. So you can just click on that request. If you haven't done so and you feel like you will get something out of this, then by all means request it. And then probably end of the week, or most likely the beginning of next week, is when I'll then set that up for team meetings and start shooting that out to you guys. All right. So just stop. Oop, stop recording. Yep.